Let me ask you something that most leadership coaches, most board directors, and most organizational consultants are too polite or too financially conflicted to ask you directly. When you think about your successor, the person who will one day sit in your chair, carry your title, and lead the organization you have built, what is the honest emotional response that lives underneath the professional answer? Is it pride? The genuine, undefended satisfaction of knowing that what you built is strong enough to outlast you? Or is it something else, something quieter and considerably less comfortable? A flicker of anxiety, maybe? A subtle resistance? A tendency to find, every time you get close to the conversation, a reason to delay it, to defer it, to focus on something more urgent, more immediate, more safely within your control. The majority of senior leaders who claim to prioritize succession planning are unconsciously doing the opposite, not through malice, not through negligence, but through something far more insidious, a deep, biologically rooted, psychologically sophisticated fear they have never been asked to name: the fear of irrelevance. The fear that when the organization no longer needs you, when the successor is so capable, so empowered, so genuinely ready, you will discover that the title was the thing, that the role was the identity, that the you that existed before the leadership position may not have quite survived the person the position required you to become. And so, without ever deciding to, you groom followers instead of successors. You develop talent to a point just below the level where it genuinely threatens your centrality. You create dependencies instead of capabilities. You share knowledge selectively. You make yourself the answer to questions you should be teaching your people to answer without you. Today, we are going to say that out loud. Welcome to the H2H experiment. I am Joao and I am your host. Today, we go somewhere that most leadership content treats as a technical problem, a planning exercise, a governance checklist, a talent management framework. And we expose it for what it actually is: one of the most psychologically revealing, most emotionally loaded, most personally consequential challenges in the entire experience of senior leadership. Succession failure is not the dramatic kind, not the sudden departure, the emergency handover, the boardroom coup. It is quieter, more gradual, more deniable, and far more common. Here's what it actually looks like in practice. One kind: the dependency architect. This leader has built an organization in which their personal involvement is structurally embedded in every major decision, not because the organization requires it, but because the leader has, over time, made it require it. Information flows to them before it flows anywhere else. Decisions wait for their input. The team has learned through years of subtle reinforcement that the highest quality outcomes require the leader's direct touch. This feels from the inside like indispensability. From the outside, it is a liability so severe that the organization cannot function without this specific human being. Another kind: the talent ceiling setter. This leader develops people brilliantly, up to a point. They invest in training, coaching, exposure. They champion their high potentials enthusiastically and publicly. But observe what happens when a team member begins to approach genuine peer-level capability. The promotions slow down. The visibility decreases. The most complex, highest profile challenges get quietly reserved for the leader only. The unconscious message is precise: you can grow as long as you don't outgrow me. The third kind: the knowledge hoarder. These leaders' institutional knowledge, the relationships, the context, the tacit understanding of how things actually work, lives almost entirely in their head. not because they decided to hoard it, but because transferring it would require confronting the question of what remains when it is transferred. What is the leader without the knowledge others need from them? And the other kind, the perpetual transition. This leader has discussed succession in every annual review from the past 7 years. There is always a reason the timing is not quite right. The market conditions, the team's readiness, the specific complexity of this particular moment. The succession conversation is perpetually on the horizon, close enough to demonstrate awareness, but distant enough to never actually arrive. A study by Harvard Business Review found that the average tenure of a CEO is now under 5 years in most major markets. And the single most common reason for leadership failure in the transition period is not the new leader's inadequacy. It is the previous leader's failure to build the conditions for genuine succession. The predecessor, consciously or not, leaves behind an organization so dependent on their specific presence that even a highly capable successor struggles to establish genuine authority. The trap is set long before anyone realizes there is a trap at all. Now, let's look at it from the neuroscience perspective. The succession trap is not primarily a strategic failure, it is a neurological one. The human brain processes identity, the sense of who you are, what role you occupy in the social world, in the prefrontal cortex, specifically the medial and dorsal medial prefrontal cortex. UCLA neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman has documented that these regions are active almost continuously in leaders because leadership roles are inherently identity saturated. The title, the authority, the organizational centrality are not just professional attributes. Over time, they become existential ones. They become the answer to the question, who am I? When the brain perceives a threat to its social identity, its status, its role, its position in the hierarchy, it activates the same neurocircuitry as a threat to physical survival. The amygdala fires, cortisol rises, the prefrontal cortex goes partially offline, and the brain enters a state of threat-driven self-protection that is, neurologically speaking, indistinguishable from the response to any other existential danger. The leader is not choosing to sabotage succession. Their nervous system is doing it for them, while their conscious mind maintains the narrative of commitment to developing the next generation. Their subcortical threat response is working overtime to ensure the next generation never quite becomes fully capable of making them optional. Peer-reviewed research published in Frontiers in Psychiatry, a systematic review of 34 neuroscience studies, found that grandiose narcissism is associated with heightened vigilance to ego threat and disproportionate stress responses when the ego is challenged, and leadership roles actively amplify narcissistic traits. The higher the position, the more the role shapes identity, and the more neurologically threatening the prospect of genuine succession becomes. This is not a flaw in character. It is a predictable outcome of placing human brains, evolved for tribal status hierarchies, wired for identity protective threat responses, inside organization structures that make role identity fusion almost inevitable. Now, let's jump to the philosophy part of it. The fear of irrelevance is not a modern pathology. It is as old as human civilization. The ancient Stoics had a practice they called memento mori, the daily, deliberate, disciplined contemplation of one's own death, not as morbidity, as cognitive hygiene, as the practice of remembering that you are temporary and that the things you have built, the roles you occupy, the identities you have constructed will outlast you whether you choose that or not. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, how many are Chrysippus, how many are Socrates, how many an Epictetus have time already swallowed up? He was reminding himself, not his subject, himself, that greatness does not exempt you from impermanence. That the most important thing a leader can build is something that continues without them. The philosopher Ernest Becker, in his 1974 Pulitzer Prize-winning work, The Denial of Death, argued that the fundamental terror of human existence is the terror of our own insignificance, of our own erasure, of the moment when the world continues indifferently without us. Becker called the strategies we use to deny this terror immortality projects, the things we build, the roles we occupy, the legacies we construct to convince ourselves that we matter permanently. Leadership, especially at senior levels, is one of the most powerful immortality projects available to a human being. The organization becomes the leader's monument. The succession becomes the threat to the monument's permanence. And the unconscious work of ensuring no one can quite fill the role is the ego's attempt to make itself literally irreplaceable. This is not leadership. This is the ego's terror of death, dressed in a suit and given an organizational title. The genuinely great leaders, the ones history actually remembers for the right reasons, are the ones who understood that the measures of their leadership was not the organization's dependence on them. It was the organization's independence from them. Building something so strong, so capable, so genuinely excellent that it no longer needed the person who started it. That is the hardest thing in leadership. And it is the only thing that actually constitutes a legacy. Now, let's take a look together at a case study. Jack Welch is, by most conventional measures, one of the greatest corporate leaders of the 20th century. During his tenure as CEO of General Electric from 1981 to 2001, he grew GE's market capitalization from $12 billion to over $410 billion. He was named Manager of the Century by Fortune magazine. He built Crotonville, GE's legendary Management Development Institute, into a pipeline that produced senior leaders across the American economy. When Welch retired in 2001, he had spent over 6 years on succession planning, one of the longest, most publicized succession processes in corporate history. He created a public horse race among 3 internal finalists. The process was described at the time as the most closely watched, highly anticipated, and frequently second-guessed corporate succession drama ever. He chose Jeffrey Immelt. Within months, the other 2 finalists, Bob Nardelli and Jim McInerney, left GE entirely. After decades of grooming internal leaders for the top position, the final decision triggered a mass exodus of senior executive talent. Welch had created a competition that destroyed the very bench strength it was supposed to demonstrate. When Immelt left GE in August 2017, the company's market cap had plummeted from $410 billion to $200 billion, a loss of $210 billion in shareholder value. By 2021, GE announced it was splitting into 3 separate companies, the final dismantling of the conglomerate Welch had built. Welch reportedly told associates that his choice of Immelt was his biggest mistake. But as one analyst noted with precision, this mea culpa was actually a dodge. It implied that a post-Welch GE could have succeeded with a different leader, rather than confronting the far more uncomfortable truth whether Welch himself had made genuine succession structurally impossible. Welch spent 6 years on succession planning, but he spent 20 years building an organization so thoroughly organized around his specific personality that it was almost structurally impossible for any successor to inhabit the role authentically. He didn't choose the wrong successor. He built an organization that made succession itself almost impossible. A quick note. GE's collapse had multiple causes, including 9/11, the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, and structural issues with GE Capital. Succession failure was a significant contributing factor, not the sole cause. But the pattern of how Welch built, how he selected, and how he behaved after handing over, including publicly second guessing emails, is forensically documented and deeply instructive. Now, compare this to Tim Cook's succession at Apple. In April 2026, Apple announced that Cook would step down on September 1st, 2026, with John Ternus, a 25-year Apple veteran, taking over following a thoughtful long-term succession planning process, approved unanimously by the board. No horse race, no public drama, no exodus of senior talent. A transition so well prepared that the announcement itself generated confidence rather than anxiety. The contrast with Welch's approach could not be more instructive. Now, here is how we make to H2H shift in this topic. I'm asking you to build toward your own obsolescence, deliberately, consciously, as a daily leadership practice. Not because it will feel good, it will feel threatening actually, but because it is the only form of leadership that actually produces something worth building. Here's what we're going to have to do. First, conduct an honest dependency audit. Look at your organization and ask, what can this organization not do without me specifically that it should be able to do without any individual? Every answer is a succession risk. Every answer is also evidence of a dependency you have built. Consciously or not, this is not about judging. That serves your sense of centrality more than it serves the organization. Make a list, then make a plan. Specific, timed, accountable to transfer each dependency to organizational capability. Second step, identify your ceiling setting behaviors. Who on your team has stopped growing? Not because they've reached their potential, but because they've reached your comfort level with their growth. Who got close to genuine peer level capability and found subtly that the opportunities dried up? Who left your organization in the last 2 years that you quietly knew was leaving because the ceiling above them was your ego? Name them. Then ask what you will need to change in yourself, not in them. Third, measure your leadership by subtraction, not addition. Start measuring what you subtract from. How many decisions got made well without your input this week? How many problems got solved before they reached your desk? How much of the organization's capability is genuinely portable, existing independently of your specific presence? The leader whose organization functions brilliantly in their absence has built something real. The leader whose organization cannot function without them has built a dependency, not an organization. And fourth, name the fear directly to yourself and to a trusted challenger. Find someone, a coach, a peer, a board member, a therapist, I don't know, who will not be complicit in your immortality project, who will ask you with genuine rigor whether the succession plans you describe match the organizational behaviors you are actually producing. That gap between what you say about succession and what your organization's structure actually reflects is the measure of how deeply the trap has you. Most people treat silence like a vacuum that will suck the authority right out of a room. We fill it with ums and ahs and corporate buzzwords because we're terrified of the void. But silence is not empty. It's where your leadership actually lives. In my book, Shut Up and Feel, I break down the anti-technique for human-to-human communication. It's a guide for leaders who are done with the masks and ready for the truth. We explore why your vulnerability is your greatest competitive advantage and how to command any room, not by talking louder, but by being more present. The world doesn't need another polished presenter. It needs a human. Search for Shut Up and Feel on Amazon, or just click in the link in the description of this episode. Now let's move to the H2H experiment of the week, the obsolescence test. This week, I want you to run the most confronting experiment in the H2H catalog so far. Over the next 30 days, every time you make a decision, answer a question, solve a problem, or provide information that your organization needs, ask yourself immediately afterward, why did this come to me? Should it have? And what would need to be true for it to never need to come to me again? Write the answers down every single day. At the end of 30 days, you will have a precise forensic map of every dependency your organization has built around your specific person. Then take that map to the person you believe is closest to being your genuine successor. Not to inform them, to ask them to help you dismantle it. Watch what happens in that conversation. Watch your own resistance as you have it. Watch the moments where you instinctively want to qualify, to retain, to keep some part of the centrality you nominally want to transfer. Those moments of resistance are the trap, and seeing them clearly in real time, in a real conversation, with a real consequence, is the only way to begin to break them. Now, let's wrap up this episode. Every leader will eventually become irrelevant to the organization they built. This is an absolute truth. This is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty. Time will make it true whether you cooperate with that truth or not. That's gonna come. The only question is whether you become irrelevant because the organization grew strong enough to no longer need you, which is the triumph, or because it stayed weak and dependent and finally collapsed under the weight of a succession you never really prepared for. One of those is a legacy, the other is an epitaph. Build the succession, name the fear, set your people free, and then find out who you are when the organization no longer needs you to be its answer. That discovery, when it is made with courage and honesty, is not the end of your leadership. It is its fullest expression. The measure of a leader is not the organization's need for them. It is the organization's freedom from them. And this is the end of this episode. I hope that you have enjoyed it. If it resonated with you, please make sure to subscribe so that you get notified whenever we launch a new episode. And thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us and to being part of this transformation of making business more human. Thank you once again. See you next time. Bye.